We're doing something a little bit different in this episode. This is our first one, but occasionally we'll be putting out Wednesday episodes that we'll treat as a kind of special. They won't necessarily be topics relevant to the news cycle, and may vary in format depending on what we want to discuss. For now, there's no set schedule for these, but we already have some ideas, so stay tuned for more. From Rixie, this is Debuff, and I'm your host, Steve Skeels. Today I'll be talking about some of my favorite YouTube channels surrounding video game design and development. The three channels I want to highlight are Game Makers Toolkit, Noclip, and GDC. As someone who loves video games, I became interested in how games are made and specifically what choices go into their design in order to provide players with the intended experience. Each of these channels does something different, so they're all worth checking out, both as a fan or game designer. With these three channels, you can see how game design choices are viewed from the lens of a fan to the developers themselves. So let's get into it. Mark Brown's Game Makers Toolkit is a channel full of very well done video essays. These videos typically focus on one game or one element of game design and go into the details of why certain things do or do not work. These are all from the perspective of a fan and show how someone can view the choices made in a game and with a little bit of research, fully understand how those decisions came about and whether or not they achieved what they were intended to. These videos typically range about 10 to 20 minutes and use games from The Legend of Zelda to Overcooked in order to cover topics as obvious as dungeon design to more subtle ones such as the way games push players to communicate. Mark Brown often uses somewhat older releases to demonstrate his point, which I really enjoy because it shows that he's not trying to shoehorn ideas into new games in order to get the views. The games he chooses are because he has something he wants to talk about, and those games are what fit the best. And if it is a topic that has to do with a new game, it's because he got inspired when playing it. You can tell from these videos that they're coming from a place of passion and a desire to share his perspective on the aspects of game design that he finds interesting. I personally feel like I've learned quite a bit about games and why I feel like certain features work and why some miss the mark. One of my favorites is his video on the dual-purpose design in the game Downwell. It's a simple game, but I got really into it a few years back, and I couldn't quite put my finger on why. Well, he did a great job explaining how everything in the game is kind of interconnected and plays extremely well for a game with so few buttons. It's great game design overall. I recommend you go ahead and scroll through his videos and just pick one that sounds interesting. I highly doubt you'll be disappointed. There's even playlists that categorize the videos into broader topics, so if you want to look into game design for stealth games, you can go check out the 10 videos he has relating to that. If you really don't know where to start, I'd say his Boss Keys series is a great introduction. These focus on non-linear level design and talk about how developers can push players in the right direction or choose to close off areas until later. Many of these focus on Zelda games, but there's a few on other titles as well. And if you're interested in developing games, Mark Brown also hosts a game jam where you get 48 hours to develop a game. The next one will be on July 10th, so go check that out. Noclip is an awesome channel that has definitely garnered a lot of attention in the gaming space. The channel isn't huge, but I see it get brought up pretty frequently on the internet. Noclip creates crowdfunded video game documentaries where they get the developers involved to tell their stories. Noclip is an interesting one because it is made by fans, but it is mostly information straight from the creators. Noclip helps put out the stories that the developers want to tell in a rather concise manner. Most of these videos range from about 15 minutes to an hour, and some are even parts of a multiple series that have broken down different aspects of game development. There are many other channels I enjoy that do something similar, though they are typically from the perspective of a fan who researched the game. And while those are great, Noclip is the best that I've seen, especially because they get the information straight from the source. Now, most of the videos, like any documentary, are basically a series of the developers' responses to interview questions. But they're really well edited, and they show clips of behind-the-scenes footage, which demonstrates where these people work and what the other side of the video game industry is like. You'll often get to see clips of running code or development within an engine. And while it's only brief, it does demonstrate the human aspect of these games that often feel like they're generated from faceless companies. Then, of course, the editors do a great job at splicing in gameplay footage to demonstrate exactly what the developers are talking about at that moment. Most of the videos are about what you'd expect, documentaries on the making of or the history of, but there are also some specific topics like the design of fatalities in Mortal Kombat, which is really cool and isn't something that you might get to see on random videos elsewhere. There's different documentaries on big AAA titles, as well as smaller indies, so there's a good spread of content that demonstrates the differences between these companies and what the process of developing a game might entail. Additionally, there are a few videos on things that are not necessarily part of game development, like their video on behind the scenes at E3, which I think does a great job at showing exactly what it's like for the media personnel that are involved in one of gaming's biggest events. Overall, there's a lot of content here, and you should see if there's something that catches your attention. Personally, I'd start big and go for one of their longer documentaries to see what these guys are capable of. Their Half-Life documentary is almost 2 hours long, but is a great watch. And for something a bit shorter, I'd recommend The Making of Horizon Zero Dawn. If you like what you see, go check out their Patreon and subscribe for additional content like their bonus podcast episodes or early access to documentaries. And last, I want to talk about one of my all-time favorite channels to check out, the YouTube channel for the Game Developers Conference, or GDC. This channel has recordings from talks given at the conference and provides real-world experience on game design and even topics like the marketing and community management of different games. So obviously this channel provides information from the perspective of the developers themselves and is straight, uncut information on what they wanted to share with other people in the industry. Lessons learned, development philosophies, and more are all here. This is an invaluable resource for anyone looking to learn about game design from the people who live it. Like I said, these talks are all intended for people in the industry and are an awesome way to get a peek into it without attending GDC yourself. Even if you have no interest in making games, most of the talks are understandable by the layman and are still worth checking out. There are definitely some that get into the technical side, but they are almost always obvious from the title or stated at the beginning of the talk, so you can skip those if you're not into it. The videos range from about 20 minutes to an hour, and depending on the topic can easily be thrown on in the background while doing something else. Like with the Noclip documentaries, there's a mix of experience from AAA and smaller titles, so it's likely that there's something here relevant to your interests, or with a scope similar to a game that maybe you want to make. Some of my favorites are talks given by indie studios discussing the development of their games. The ones given by the guys at Red Hook Studios, who made Darkest Dungeon, or the ones by Subset Games, who made FTL and Into the Breach, are fantastic videos to watch. Though I will admit, it's partially because I love those games, but they give perspective on just what a few people can accomplish themselves, creating really solid experiences and ending up on a stage that's shared by some of the bigger names out there. Throughout the whole channel, there's quite a lot of information and history that you can gather from these talks. I'd recommend checking out the post-mortem videos. There's over 100 listed, and games from Gauntlet to Bejeweled to newer games like Horizon Zero Dawn are all there. So check it out, and if you're interested, you may want to check out the actual conference, which is being hosted online this year and will supposedly be open to everyone. I'm sure there are multiple videos here that will be worth your time. So check it out, and if you're interested, you may want to check out the actual conference, which is being hosted online this year and will supposedly be open to everyone. Debuff is hosted by me, Steve Skeels, edited and mixed by Mason Carlton. Follow us on Instagram at DebuffPod. That's Debuff, P-O-D. Like I said, this is a special episode, so I hope you enjoyed something a bit different than our typical news. Stay tuned, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.